Hello everyone. Welcome to Realist Quill. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? There's something different about working nights. The world feels hollow somehow. Like you're walking through empty spaces where people should be. I've been doing security at Riverview Medical Center for almost 6 years now. And I still haven't gotten used to the feeling. Most nights are uneventful. I walk my rounds, check the doors and make sure everything's in its right place. But last month, something happened that I still can't explain. It was around 3 a.m. when I made my rounds to the East Wing, the oldest part of the hospital. Most of it had been renovated except for the 5th floor, which was closed off for construction. As I approached the service elevator, I noticed the indicator light showed it was traveling down from the 5th floor. That was my first red flag. No one should have been up there, especially not at that hour. When the doors opened, the elevator was empty. I stepped inside, pressed the button for the ground floor, and felt that familiar lurch as it started to descend. About halfway down, the elevator stopped suddenly. The lights flickered, and for a moment I thought we were having a power outage. Then I smelled it, antiseptic, mixed with something metallic. The kind of smell that takes you back to childhood doctor visits. I reached for my radio to call maintenance when I heard a voice behind me. "Excuse me, which way to radiology?" I nearly jumped out of my skin. Turning around, I saw an elderly woman in a faded hospital gown. Her hair was disheveled and her arms were covered in bruises from IV needle. But what unsettled me most was how she'd appeared in a sealed elevator that had been empty seconds before. "Ma'am, how did you get in here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked confused. "I've been here all along, dear. I'm just trying to get to my X-ray appointment." I explained that radiology wasn't seeing patients at this hour, and asked for her name and room number, thinking she must be a confused patient who'd wandered off. "Room 512, she said. "Dr. Martinez is expecting me." My blood ran cold. Room 512 was on the 5th floor, the floor that had been closed for renovation, and there hadn't been a Dr. Martinez at Riverview in over 20 years, according to the old-timer. The elevator lurched again and continued its descent. I turned away for just a second to press the emergency button, and when I looked back, the woman was gone. The next day, I went to the hospital archives and asked to see old patient records. The clerk was a friend of mine, so she bent the rules a bit. I found what I was looking for in the 1978 files. A newspaper clipping about a power failure that had trapped an elderly patient in an elevator overnight. By the time they found her the next morning, she had died from a heart attack. The patient's name was Eleanor Wright, room 512. I've requested a transfer to day shift, but until that comes through, I still walk my rounds at night. And every time I pass that service elevator, I hold my breath when the doors open, because sometimes I catch a faint whiff of antiseptic, and I know Eleanor is still trying to make it to her appointment. People think being a private investigator is all stakeouts and car chases. It's not. Most days, it's just paperwork and phone calls, but occasionally, you get a case that follows you home at night. I specialize in finding people, missing teenagers, debtors who've skipped town, spouses who've vanished with the kids. I've got a knack for it. So much so that people around Manchester started calling me the Finder. 3 months ago, a woman named Marianne came to my office. Her brother, Paul, had disappeared after moving to a small village outside the city. He'd been there just 3 weeks before all communication stopped. Police had done their cursory checks. No signs of foul play. No body, just a grown man exercising his right to go off-grid. But Marianne wasn't buying it. She showed me the last text message he'd sent. "Something's wrong with this place. People are watching me, not the neighbors. Something else. I think they want me to join them." Standard paranoia, I thought. Maybe drugs. Maybe a mental health episode. Still, I took the case. The village was one of those picture-perfect English hamlets. Stone cottages, a single pub, a small church. Paul had rented a cottage at the edge of town, backing up to dense woodland. When I arrived, it was empty but untouched. His car was still in the drive, clothes still in the closet, dishes still in the sink. I spent the day interviewing neighbors. Everyone said the same thing. Paul had seemed fine, then grew increasingly paranoid, claiming he was being watched. Then one day he just wasn't there anymore. As the sun began to set, I decided to check the woods behind his cottage. Perhaps he'd wandered off during an episode. The forest was dense, with paths that twisted in confusing ways. About half a mile in, I found something strange. A circle of stones, each about the size of a football. In the center was a smaller circle of what looked like animal bones. I took photos, thinking it was probably just kids messing around. As I was putting my phone away, I noticed something carved into a nearby tree. Paul's initials and a date. The date was from 1 week after his disappearance. The sun was setting faster now, and I knew I should head back, but I pressed on, following a barely visible path that led deeper into the woods. That's when I started hearing the whisper. At first I thought it was just the wind through the leaves, but it gradually formed into words I couldn't quite make out. I turned in circles, trying to locate the source, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then I saw them shadows moving between the trees. Not animal shapes, but not quite human either. They moved too fluidly, too purposefully. I ran, tripping over roots and branches in my panic. When I finally broke free of the tree line, I was nowhere near Paul's cottage. Instead, I'd emerged near the village church. The lights were on inside, despite the late hour. Desperate for safety, I pushed open the heavy wooden door. Inside, the vicar was lighting candles at the altar. He didn't seem surprised to see me, despite my disheveled appearance. "You've been in the woods," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. "Looking for Paul Winters, I assume," he continued. I hadn't told anyone in the village why I was there. "How did you know?" The vicar smiled sadly. "You're not the first to come looking. The woods, they call to certain people. People who are searching, who feel disconnected. Paul heard them. Now you have too." He explained that the village had an ancient history, founded by a cult that worshipped forest spirits. Most villagers dismissed it as folklore, but the vicar believed there was truth to it. The woods contained something old and hungry that occasionally called to outsiders. "Will I find Paul if I go back in?" I asked. "You'll find something wearing Paul's face," the vicar replied, "but it won't be him anymore." I left the village that night and haven't returned. I told Marianne that I couldn't find any trace of her brother. It was the first time I'd ever failed to find someone. But sometimes when I'm alone in my flat at night, I hear those whispers again, and I know that whatever lives in those woods has followed me home. I think I understand now why they call me the Finder. It's not because I'm good at finding people. It's because something has been waiting for me to find it. I never should have opened that sample. That's what I keep telling myself as I sit here in quarantine, watching the red rash slowly spread up my arm. Protocol exists for a reason, but when you've been researching the same extinct virus for 15 years, you get comfortable, complacent. It started 3 weeks ago. Our lab at the ECET received a sample from an archaeological dig in northern Alaska. They'd uncovered the remains of a small settlement, possibly dating back to the 1800s. Among the artifacts was a sealed glass vial containing what appeared to be biological material. Given the delicate nature of the find, they sent it to us for analysis. Initial tests showed it contained organic matter, specifically human tissue preserved by the permafrost. Further analysis revealed traces of what looked like variola major, the virus responsible for smallpox. This was a significant find. Smallpox has been eradicated worldwide since 1980. The only known samples exist in 2 secure laboratories, one in Atlanta, one in Russia. Having a preserved wild sample could provide valuable insights into how the virus evolved. My supervisor wanted to follow standard protocol. Keep the sample sealed in the containment chamber and analyze it remotely. But I argued that the age of the sample meant any viral particles would be degraded beyond the point of viability. Besides, I'd been vaccinated against smallpox as part of my work. He reluctantly agreed to let me continue my analysis, but only in the BSL-4 lab with full containment protocols. The sample was fascinating. Perfectly preserved cells showing clear signs of infection. But as I worked, I noticed something strange. The viral structure wasn't quite right. It had similarities to smallpox, but the protein envelope was configured differently. That should have been my second warning. Instead, it excited me. A variant strain, possibly something that had never been documented. On the 3rd day of testing, I made the mistake. I was transferring a slide to the electron microscope when my hand slipped. The slide cracked, not a major breach, but enough that I knew I'd been exposed. I immediately followed decontamination procedures and reported the incident. Blood tests were ordered, and I was placed in isolation as a precaution. For the first week, nothing happened. I convinced myself I was fine. The virus was old, degraded, harmless. Then came the fever. Low at first, just a degree above normal. The medical team increased their monitoring but remained optimistic. After all, I'd been vaccinated against smallpox, and this appeared to be a related strain. On day 9, the rash appeared, a single red spot on my wrist near where the exposure had occurred. By evening, it had spread halfway up my forearm. The spots are different from traditional smallpox. They're darker, and instead of rising above the skin, they seem to sink inward, like tiny wounds. The lab results came back today. Whatever this is, it's replicating despite my vaccination. It's similar enough to smallpox that they've started calling it variola antiquus, but different enough that existing treatments might not work. I'm patient 0 in what could become a new outbreak. The doctors come in less frequently now, and when they do, their suits seem thicker. Their movements more cautious. They've moved me to a special containment unit built for Ebola cases. The rash has reached my shoulder now. The sores have started to weep a clear fluid that tests positive for live virus. I've been told not to touch them, but the itching is becoming unbearable. Last night, I overheard 2 doctors outside my room. One was suggesting they move me to the secure facility, our term for the place where the most dangerous pathogens are studied. No one has ever gone in as a living patient. I don't think I'm leaving this room alive, but what terrifies me more is the thought that something else I should have followed protocol. Some things are meant to stay buried in the ice. I've been a sound engineer for almost 20 years. Studio work, mostly helping artists capture that perfect track, cleaning up audio for podcasts, occasionally doing sound design for indie films. It's a good living, and I'd always taken pride in my ability to hear things others miss. That's why the Hastings project seemed perfect when it landed in my inbox. A simple job. An old family was renovating their ancestral home, a Victorian mansion that had been in their family for generations. They wanted to document the process for a potential streaming series and needed someone to do field recordings and clean up the audio afterward. The pay was excellent, too good for what the job entailed, if I'm being honest. But they insisted on hiring someone with my experience level. The house has acoustic peculiarities, the email explained. We need someone who can work around them. I arrived on a Tuesday morning. The Hastings mansion sat on several acres of wooded land just outside Portland, Maine. It was impressive. 3 stories of weathered red brick with a tower on one end, and a wraparound porch. Classic Victorian architecture, though clearly in need of the renovation they had planned. Mrs. Hastings greeted me at the door. She was a tall, elegant woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes that seemed to evaluate my every movement. Her husband was away on business, she explained. But their daughter Eliza would be around if I needed anything. There's just one rule, Mrs. Hastings said as she showed me to my equipment room. Don't record in the East Wing. The acoustics there are unsuitable for what we need. I nodded, though I found it strange. Usually clients want every inch of their property covered, but they were paying, so their rules. The first few days went smoothly. I captured ambient sounds throughout the house. The creak of floorboards, the settling of old timber, the distant sounds of construction crews working outside. Each evening, I'd return to my hotel room to clean up the day's recordings. It was on the third night that I noticed something odd in the background of an ambient recording I'd made in the main hallway. Beneath the sound of distant hammering and footsteps, there was a voice too faint to make out words, but definitely human. I isolated the audio, enhanced it, and cleaned it up. It was a woman's voice, whispering what sounded like, come see what they did." I assumed it was Eliza, the daughter, perhaps talking on her phone just out of sight. But something about the quality of the voice bothered me. It had a strange echo, as if it were recorded in a much larger space than the hallway. The next day, I set up my equipment near where I'd captured the whisper, hoping to get cleaner audio if it happened again. As I worked, Eliza brought me coffee. She was in her 20s, quieter than her mother, with the same watchful eyes. "Finding everything you need?" she asked. I mentioned the voice I'd heard on the recording, careful to frame it as curiosity rather than concern. Her face changed just for a moment, before she regained her composure. "Probably just me," she said, "though I don't remember being in that part of the house yesterday." After she left, I continued my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When lunchtime came and the house emptied for a break, I decided to explore the forbidden East Wing. It wasn't locked, which surprised me. Inside was a long corridor with doors on either side, most of them closed. At the end of the hall stood a final door, larger than the others, with intricate carvings on its surface. I set up my best directional microphone and began recording. At first, there was nothing unusual, just the typical sounds of an old house. Then I heard it again, that whisper, clearer this time. "Come see what they did to us." I followed the sound to the carved door at the end of the hall. When I pressed my ear against it, the whisper became a chorus of voices, all speaking in unison. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught phrases: trapped, countless years, they knew. My hand shook as I turned the doorknob. Beyond was a large circular room, empty except for a strange apparatus in the center. It looked like an old phonograph horn, but larger, embedded in the floor and pointing upward. The walls were covered in what I initially took to be decorative paneling, but soon recognized as acoustic treatments, primitive versions of what we use in modern studios. This room had been designed for sound, not to keep it out, but to keep it in. I set up my equipment and began recording. For almost an hour, nothing happened. Then, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the room's high windows, the whispering started again. But this time, it wasn't coming through my headphones. It was in the room with me. "He's here. He's listening. Show him." The air in the center of the room above the horn-like structure began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The shimmer formed into shapes, human shapes, dozens of them, crowded together as if standing in an invisible chamber. I watched, paralyzed, as one figure separated from the group and approached me. It was a young woman in Victorian dress, her form transparent, but distinct. Her mouth moved, and this time I heard her clearly. The Hastings family has always had a gift for capturing voices, first with their machines, then with something far more powerful. We are their collection, their recordings, made permanent. I grabbed my equipment and ran, the whispers following me down the corridor. In my haste, I left one high-end microphone behind. When I reached the main part of the house, I found Mrs. Hastings waiting, her face tight with anger. You were given one rule, she said. What the hell is that room? I demanded. What did I just see? A family legacy, she replied calmly. My ancestors discovered that certain sounds played at certain frequencies could preserve aspects of a person. Their voice, their image, their essence. They built that chamber to perfect the process. Those are people in there, I said. Echoes of people, she corrected. From servants who displeased them to business rivals who stood in their way. My family has been collecting voices for generations, and we've become quite adept at it. She smiled. And for the first time, I noticed the same strange quality in her voice that I'd heard in the whispers. That unnatural resonance. We had hoped you could help us modernize our methods, she continued. Your expertise in digital audio is quite impressive, but now I see we'll have to add you to the collection instead. I didn't wait to hear more. I fled the house, drove straight to my hotel and checked out within the hour. I've been driving ever since, putting as much distance as possible between myself and that house. But it hasn't helped, because when I finally stopped to rest and checked the recordings I'd managed to save, I found something impossible. Every audio file, regardless of when or where it was recorded in that house, now contains the same whispers. Dozens of voices calling for help, and among them, one that I recognize as my own, though I have no memory of speaking the words. Come see what they did to us. I never wanted the night shift at the Parkview Extended Stay Motel. But beggars can't be choosers. After 6 months of unemployment and dwindling savings, I was grateful for any job, even one that kept me awake from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. in a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. The Parkview wasn't exactly the Ritz. It was the kind of place where people stayed when they had nowhere else to go. Travelers on tight budgets, locals between apartments, and the occasional couple looking for discretion. The carpet was stained, the wallpaper peeling, and no matter how much air freshener we sprayed, the entire place smelled vaguely of cigarettes and desperation. My job was simple. Check in any late arrivals, handle guest concerns, and make sure no one caused trouble. Most nights I'd see maybe 1 or 2 check-ins, take a few phone calls, and spend the rest of my shift watching Netflix on my laptop. The weird stuff started about a month in. I was dozing at the front desk around 3 a.m. when the phone rang. It was from front desk, I answered, trying to sound alert. There was nothing but static on the line, punctuated by what sounded like heavy breathing. Hello? This is the front desk. Can I help you? More static than a voice, distorted but recognizable as a man's. Who's in 299? Sir, room 299 is currently unoccupied. The breathing got heavier. Someone's in there. I can hear them walking back and forth, all night, every night. I assured him I'd look into it and hung up. The records confirmed what I already knew. 217 and 299 were both vacant and had been for over a week. I figured it was probably someone who'd checked in under the table during the day shift. It wouldn't be the first time one of my colleagues had pocketed cash and forgotten to enter a guest in the system. I grabbed the master key and headed to the second floor. Room 27 was indeed empty. No sign anyone had been there. No luggage, the bed still made. Room 299 was the same. Back at the desk, I checked the call log. No call had been recorded from room 2. I dismissed it as a prank, or maybe a crossed line from another hotel. But the next night at exactly 3 a.m., the phone rang again. Room 217 this time. The voice was clearer. They're moving furniture now. Can't you hear it? Make them stop. I explained that the room was empty, but the caller became agitated. Don't lie to me. I can hear them. The same thing, every night. Walking, dragging. Walking, dragging. The call disconnected. Again, no record of it appeared in the system. The third night, I decided to wait in room 299 self. I brought a chair from the lobby, set it in the middle of the dark room and waited. At 2:55 a.m., my phone vibrated with a text from the front desk clerk I'd asked to cover for me. Room 2. I hadn't heard a sound from next door, but I pressed my ear against the wall anyway. Nothing. Then, at exactly 3 a.m., it started. Not from room 217, but from directly above me. Heavy footsteps, pacing back and forth. Then the unmistakable sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Back and forth, back and forth. The thing is, room 219 was on the top floor. There was nothing above it but the roof. I ran out into the hallway and took the maintenance stairs to the roof. The door was locked, just as it should be, with no sign it had been opened recently. I used my master key to unlock it. The roof was empty, just air conditioning units and the gray gravel covering the surface. Not a footprint in sight. When I returned to the lobby, the clerk who'd been covering for me looked pale. Room 217 called again, she said. Asked if you'd heard it yet. I went back to room 217 and knocked. No answer. I used my master key to open the door. The room was still empty, but this time, something was different. The bed had been moved about a foot from the wall, and in the space behind it, someone had peeled away a section of wallpaper. Written on the exposed drywall was a message. Look up the accident. The next morning, instead of going straight home to sleep, I went to the local library and looked through their newspaper archives. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. 15 years earlier, a man named Robert Kendall had been found dead in room 319, directly above what was now room 219. He'd been staying at the motel for 3 weeks, apparently hiding from someone. The cleaning staff found him after neighbors complained about a smell. According to the article, the police determined he'd been dead for days before discovery. The cause of death was listed as suicide. But there was something odd about the report. It mentioned that furniture had been piled against the door, and the room had been significantly rearranged. When I returned from my shift that night, I asked the manager about room 319. There is no room 319, he said. We only have 2 floors. But I'd seen the newspaper article. There had definitely been a 3rd floor at some point. There was a fire about 10 years back. The manager finally admitted after I pressed him. The top floor was damaged beyond repair, so when they rebuilt, they just did 2 floors instead of 3. Changed all the room numbers. What used to be the 2nd floor became the top floor. So what used to be room 2119 is now room 2119, he confirmed. They kept the same numbering system for the first 2 floors. Less confusing that way. That night, at 3 a.m., I was waiting in room 2119 again. The footsteps and dragging started right on schedule. But this time, I didn't run to the roof. Instead, I looked up at the ceiling and said, I know about the accident, Robert. I know what happened in room 319. The noises stopped immediately. The silence was more unsettling than the sounds had been. Then my walkie-talkie crackled. We used them to communicate between the front desk and security. But I had the only other walkie-talkie with me, and it was turned off. Through the static, a voice said, it wasn't an accident. The next day, I dug deeper into the archives. I found more articles about Robert Kendall's death. He'd been a witness in a major drug trafficking case and had been placed in the motel by police while awaiting trial. The official report said he'd hanged himself from a ceiling fixture, but an independent pathologist had noted inconsistencies with a suicide. The case had been reopened briefly when a maid came forward, claiming she'd heard furniture being moved in the room the night before Kendall was found. She said it sounded like a struggle, followed by something heavy being dragged, but with no signs of forced entry and the door locked from the inside, the investigation was closed again. That night, I brought a digital recorder to room 21. At exactly 3 a.m., I pressed record and said, tell me what really happened, Robert. The footsteps and dragging sounds began again. But this time, they formed a pattern. 3 steps, drag, pause, 3 steps, drag, pause, over and over. When I played back the recording the next day, there was no sound at all, just static. But embedded in that static, visible when I looked at the audio waveform on my computer, was a pattern. 3 peaks, a trough, a pause. 3 peaks, a trough, a pause. Morse code. It spelled a name, a detective who had worked the case. I found him living in a retirement community outside of town. He remembered the case immediately. That one always bothered me, he admitted. Everything pointed to suicide, but something felt off. The room was too neat. When people kill themselves, they're not typically concerned with tidying up first. But that room, it was like it had been stayed. What about the door being locked from the inside? I asked. He looked uncomfortable. Hotel locks aren't exactly Fort Knox. Anyone with basic knowledge could make it look locked from the inside. I asked if he had any suspects. 1. Another detective who was suspiciously eager to close the case. He retired right after, bought a boat, always wondered where he got the money. I returned to the motel that night with a plan. I set up my recorder in room 2119, but this time I also brought a UV light. I'd read that certain substances, blood, primarily can remain detectable under UV light even years after cleaning. At 3 a.m., the footsteps started again. I turned on the UV light and methodically checked the room. Nothing on the walls or floor, but when I shined it on the ceiling, there it was, a faint outline that roughly matched the shape of a body, surrounded by splatter patterns consistent with blunt force trauma. Not a hanging, a beat. Over the next few days, I compiled everything I'd found. The Morse code message, the UV photographs, the newspaper articles, and sent them to the current detective in charge of cold cases. 3 weeks later, they arrested the retired detective, named in Robert's mess. Under pressure, he confessed that he'd been paid to eliminate the witness and make it look like suicide. The night after the arrest made the news, I worked my usual shift. At 3 a.m., I went to room 2119 and waited. For the first time in weeks, there was no sound, no footsteps, no dragging. I was about to leave when my walkie-talkie crackled again. "Thank you," a voice said through the static. Then silence. The calls from room 217 stopped after that night. I still work the night shift at the Parkview, keeping an eye on empty rooms and listening for voices that shouldn't be there.